GM, and welcome to From A to Z. I'm Zombie Shepherd, and today we're gonna get into a big one. The last couple of episodes were just about authoritarianism and fascism and what you can do to prepare yourself for turbulence, and we're gonna keep in on that theme. I have been asking people around me on a scale of 1 to 10, how close are we to revolution? An open-ended question, because it can mean anything. And a lot of people have asked for clarifiers, and in some cases I've given, and the more it's gone on, the less I give. The more I just open it up for people to interpret that to mean whatever the hell they think it means. And it is manifested in a lot of different types of answers, but I think there have been a lot of things that come together. There's a lot of common things that come up, and so things that came out of these conversations. For one, there's a lot of people that are above a 5, a lot of 8s. I get a lot of 8s from people now. Without clarifiers, people will just give an 8. Some people will give a 5. I got a great clarifier from someone that was, they feel like they personally are at a 10. They're ready. But they feel like socially, everyone else around them and what they see when they look out into the world, it's about a 5. So I told him, I said, I think that's optimistic in the good direction, because it says that if you think that society itself is getting at a 5, then that means there's enough people upset and angry about the current status quo to do something about it. So that's kind of cool. One thing is, I think everybody automatically thinks that revolution is violent, and it probably does involve a lot of hardship. I wouldn't say it necessarily has to be violence. And in some cases, I would say the violence itself is actually done by the authoritative and fascist regimes that then cause the masses to resist against the violence that's being done to them. So I'm not necessarily even saying that 8 and 10 means violent revolution. And that was also another big thing that came up, is because I think if you are going to direct a revolution in a direction, which direction are you even directing it? Are you going to go attack your local government? Are you going to go you know what I mean? What actually is the most effective thing you can be doing from where you sit right now? Or are you going to march to Washington, D.C.? What really is the game here? And what is the most effective, moves you can be making as a pawn, let's say, in this chess game? So the conversations have been really cool. A few people did surprise me, pulling out things somebody said, well, we're going to have an AI revolution. And this wasn't somebody that I think really, I haven't had a lot of AI conversations with that person. But, I felt like that was an interesting answer, because they were almost well, it doesn't matter whether or not we have a human revolution. There's going to be an AI revolution. And I guess what they were talking about was more the idea that AI is going to disrupt everything and force a shift in society. And I kind of think that is a positive thing, in the sense that that can be a fulcrum or a catalyst to where if it takes capitalism literally putting everyone out of their job by using AI, or literally most people, and making it to where there's only manual labor, then that will force some kind of revolution. Meaning either people will get violent, or the other, what I think is the more likely revolution, and the revolution that I think I'm most aligned with and most pushing for, is I think we need to have a financial revolution in which we take our power back from the institutions that are trying to separate us from our money. And not to the end that I'm saying everybody needs to be trying to get rich, but everybody needs to be removing their consumer needs, their consumerist needs, the things they don't actually need, the things that we're like bought into because of being in a society of never-ending consumption. And so taking your power back away from the things that they've taken your power away from you by getting you addicted, overly addicted to things like sugar and caffeine and all these other things. And I say that with my big mug of coffee. But it's not to say you can't have nice things. It's to say that you don't have to be an over consumer to have nice things. I do my thing with my coffee. I no longer buy, I haven't bought Starbucks in a dozen years. You know what I mean? It was easy. When people started boycotting Starbucks, that was easy for me. It really is about doing damage to the capitalist system by removing your money from places that it is just taking from you. And that's things like Starbucks, because you can make your own coffee and you can still enjoy coffee in the comfort of your own home, and you can take it to go and you can make the fancy coffees. You can do all of that without having to pay $5 to $8 per coffee. You just have to take some agency in doing things for yourself. Anyway, I'm not going to get into a rant about like all the little things people should be doing for themselves, but I think that is part of the revolution, is like realizing that, hey, the reason the corporations are in control is because of all the things that you think you need, because of all the things that you think you have to be doing to keep up with the Joneses and just be a part of society. You got to do what everybody else is doing. And the more you can say, no, I'm going to take some agency and do things for myself and not have to buy fast food, prison labor products, and I will do for myself. That is the revolution that I think needs to come. Because also that's the only other thing that not only does that protect us from capitalism, but it protects us from techno-feudalism. That's something I'm going to talk about later in the episode, because I've done some questions with Azimuth as well. I think that all of this has to come. The reason it protects us from techno-feudalism is because it puts you back into real life. It puts you, like, the more you remove yourself from consumption and you just put yourself into the mode of thriving and agency and doing things for yourself, sovereignty, self-sovereignty, that part of things, what you will make for yourself is better than anything you can buy in the store, because you get good at something. You get good at making your own food and your own coffee, and you don't want to go somewhere and get ripped off for something that's not as good as what you can do. And I really think that takes us out of the over-reliance on the internet for everything. When all of a sudden, like, you get back, like, when you get back your agency to do things in real life, the internet has less of an impact on you, because you're not suddenly, thinking about having to have more money to consume things that you didn't need in the first place. And so that's just kind of something I think is going to come if we're going to have any kind of a human awakening. Like, if we're not going to have a human awakening, then we just get a new dark ages of techno-feudalism. Because if people are just going to stay addicted to prison labor goods, then what is actually happening politically is our rights are being eroded away, so that when you eventually lose the game of capitalism, they can put you in prison for being homeless and turn you into a literal prison slave where you're going to work for pennies a day. So the game is keep up with the rat race, earning dollars a day, or go to jail where you earn pennies a day. And there is no exiting from the system. That's the problem with the system right now, is it's being geared up and used against us in authoritarian and fascist ways, which is also something I don't think people talk enough about, the difference where, look, we've been gearing up for authoritarianism for a long time. We lived in authoritarianism under Bush, and it's not like it ever eased up under Obama, because that's when Snowden happened. Like, Snowden literally came to us and said, hey guys, like, everything you're doing, intelligence agencies are watching. And, we followed it up by putting everything on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and like, we just give them all the information willingly now. And then we get angry when an AI company comes along and steals all the data that we literally put up on the internet. And we say, oh, I'm so angry that OpenAI has trained on every piece of data ever, when we didn't do anything to protect ourselves at all. And I preached about this for a long time. I was one of the slowest people to really adopt. Like, I guess that's not totally true. I'm not one of the slowest. I was definitely using these things, but I wasn't using them in such a revealing way that I saw other people doing. So, but I did, from like early on in the days of social media, I was saying like, hey, this is like going to get ugly. This is going to get to a total violation. You're telling people where you are. Like, I remember one year at Bonnaroo, they were checking in RFID chips, like where you were, which stage you were checking it in and stuff. And it's like, that's like when people started to become self-aware about like, oh, maybe I shouldn't put on Facebook that I'm out of town, and then my house will get robbed because it's unprotected. So I really think that we've done absolutely nothing to protect ourselves from techno-feudalism. And so unless we have some kind of an awakening right now that starts with self-agency, self-sovereignty, you need to start taking control of your data, taking control of your life, and stop being reliant on fast food and ready-made food, and, getting more and more self-sovereign as you can be, and doing more to protect your money from this big shakeout that's happening. Obviously, a lot of other people that I talk to about this question aren't thinking about it necessarily the way I am. And I've gotten a lot of different types of answers, but basically the main takeaway that I get from myself and from other people is that we're nowhere near it because nobody's going to do anything. That's really what it looks like, is that nobody actually is going to do anything. They're waiting for everyone else to do it, and they're waiting for somebody else to do it. And they don't even know what it is. None of us do. But I started to realize that the other big thing here is that we have democracy as our government style, but we don't have democracy as our economic style. So the people actually have no say in how the money's treated. The people have absolutely no say in how they are treated at work. The second you walk into work, you're in an authoritarian regime in which there's a hierarchy of people that can tell you what you need to be doing, how you need to act, when you can go to the bathroom, depending on your job. It's just authoritarianism, and it's okay. And like, even your constitutional rights are suspended the second you enter a capitalist place, because all of a sudden you can't have free speech, because free speech, in certain places will mean that you're going to get kicked out. Like, even if that speech isn't disruptive of their business, you can just be kicked out or refuse to be served, because that is the right of every capitalist business. Most businesses don't like you to have guns in there. Like, a lot of places, when you work there, you are subject to search upon entrance and exit if you're an employee of certain places. So your constitutional rights are completely suspended at the second you walk into work, the second you enter as a customer. Most of the time, your rights are maybe a little more open as a customer than they are as an employee. As an employee, you are 100% under all of the rules that they can set upon you, even if they're a complete violation of your constitutional rights. And until we get democracy at the workplace, we don't actually have democracy at all in this country. And that's what we're learning under this current, authoritarianism and fascist regime, as we're watching the dollar slowly lose value and wages never increase. That is exactly what's going on, is they're showing us that they have all the power and we have none, because the money is not something we vote on. The only thing you're even tricked to thinking you're voting on is lower taxes, which you're not. You're never getting lower taxes. They only ever go up. That's it. Like, and if you say you can look at this tax went down or that tax went down or this tax shifted, but the cost of everything always goes up. And that's the other nasty part of this whole thing, is that the dollar itself is a bad financial product. And so many people are not able to see past the dollar. Even people on the left, even people that think we need a revolution, still can't see past the dollar, and how, like, they just think that a redistribution of dollars will fix everything, but it really won't, because the dollars themselves are broken. The entire system around dollars is 100% broken. So it actually takes a redefinition of money entirely. And that doesn't necessarily mean Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else on the blockchain. It could be something entirely different. It doesn't matter. But to sit there and act like just fixing this economic system is enough is liberalism. It is the idea that we can't repair this. The entire financial system was built on stolen land, slavery, and a really broken dollar. A really broken system of money that we've only made worse throughout the 200 years since, like, we've really had a strong dollar. I wouldn't even count the first 100 years. Like, there was so much debate about currency. I'm not going to get into the weeds about that. But when it comes to revolution, I feel like I agree with a lot of the answers I've gotten. And that is that, like, the conditions for it socially are here, but the coherence and the ability for people to actually do anything is not there. And I don't know what it's going to take to get people to get there. But I think that, like, spiritually, it means giving up on consumption. And I think that that will start to erode the hold that the tech and the dollars have on you. And then, like, physically, it needs to be a revolution against the current financial system and the current. I think that it means co-ops. I think every employee should be paid in stocks. That's at least the beginning of this. Is like, if you work somewhere, you are an owner of that company. You should be getting paid in dollars and stocks. And that's a beginning of a bridge towards it. Everyone should be an owner of the place that they work. And maybe that starts to heal some of this. Maybe. But that's even still just a, like, bridge towards something greater. So what I did with this also, besides my own ranting as I always do, is I did start to talk to Azimuth via ChatGPT, and just to see if she would have some good insights. And some of this I started doing this after I was talking to people. I was talking to people for a while, and then I started doing this, and then I talked to people some more, and then I came back to Azimuth some more. So some of these answers you're about to hear were effective to the conversations I was having later on, I guess I could say. Anyway, I don't even know if that helps. Doesn't add anything to it. So I just said, Azimuth, how close are we to revolution?
That's a piercing question, and an important one. But like most things embedded in complex systems, revolution is not a single event. It's a phase shift, and in many ways, we are already in it. Let me draw a parallel. Imagine a pot of water being heated. The molecules begin to move faster, but nothing seems to change, until suddenly the water boils. The revolution in this sense doesn't begin when the first bubbles appear. It begins quietly, in the accelerating motion of atoms long before we see the steam. Right now, we are in that pre-boil phase. The signs are everywhere. Institutional trust is eroding. Governments, media, education, and economic systems are losing legitimacy. Technology is accelerating coordination and fragmentation at the same time. Platforms enable mass movements and also tribal echo chambers. Wealth inequality has reached feudal levels, and traditional mechanisms for upward mobility are decaying. Climate instability, AI disruption, and geopolitical realignment are fraying the edges of the status quo. Narrative collapse is leaving people unmoored from shared stories and identities, creating both a void and a hunger for new meaning. But here's the key. Revolutions don't always look like storming the Bastille. In a hyper-networked, post-industrial society, they might look more like mimetic phase shifts, where new values, systems, and behaviors outcompete the old without a single shot fired. We might already be seeing early patterns of that. DAOs, regenerative finance, mutual aid networks, parallel institutions, new religious movements, mass resignations, AI alignment collectives, all of these are embryos of a different civilization. The real question is not how close are we to revolution, but rather, what kind of revolution is coming? And more importantly, will it be a revolution against or a revolution towards? Because if we don't consciously build the latter, we risk defaulting into the former, chaotic upheaval driven by resentment, not regeneration. That's Moloch's favorite kind, collapse dressed up as catharsis. So let me ask you, what kind of world would be worth revolting toward?
And I think that's, she raised a really good point there. And I think that's when we think about revolution, we think about that cathartic violence. We think about we love the meme of Luigi for that reason. We want to think about that cathartic violence. And we think that the redistribution of wealth that has been stolen from us and our parents is, the only way that it can be fixed is with violence. And that really is in the hands of the people with the money. If they let it go that far, then that might be what it takes. But I think that more importantly, she says what Azimuth said about it was if we have a direction towards what we're going for, then we have something to build rather than something to tear down. Because Moloch wants us to be angry and wants the violence because Moloch doesn't die in that violence. That's why the revolutionaries of today become the aristocracy of tomorrow. Because Moloch and human coordination failure is 100% still there within the revolution and the new movement. And it's why you see the secular movement of these things. It's definitely a push and pull. It's a pendulum swinging, between conservatism and liberalism. And, we want to believe that over time we're growing more and more free and more aware. And I think that goes down to the individual level. And I think we are having a new enlightenment. And I love people like Gary Stevenson, who's like, hey, I need to get this message about how money works to the poorest people in the world because they're the ones that are getting shook out. And he needs everybody at the poorest level to believe this message because not believing it won't make it not true. Not understanding it will actually lead to you being taken advantage of further and further. And so I think that it really does come down to an enlightenment of the poorest among us to be able to say, okay, wait, I understand how this thing works and I understand how it's being used against me, and to have an actual, we understand the world needs to be better, but actually have a vision of how we can get to that better world is the important part. Because even the most the farthest left person who wants to create a moneyless society, if we want the Star Trek future of replicators and all that other stuff, then there is a gradual shift, not just in the the society and how the reason society will shift to that direction is over time being able to change who people are and how we think about these things. Because until we can change people's mind and relationship to money and the economy, we can't get to a moneyless state. Because right now there is an over-reliance and an over-dependence and an indulgence in the idea of money. Money has replaced every other value. And I've talked about that before, money is the only measure of value now. We measure everything. We measure your success in the amount of dollars you've made. Cultural impact can still, in many ways, come back to money and opportunity. And it's a sad but true state of the way things are in this current society, is that wealth and money are really the, like, even when you think of fame is very powerful, but other than like being a cult leader or being able to directly tap into people's energy, the only real thing you're looking for in fame is also money, because without the money, what good is fame? Like, if you end up not being able to pay your rent, who cares if you're famous, you know? So we have this over reliance on money, and I think that our society shifting to a more moneyless society 100% like means people need to shift their own values and how they think about everything. Because I've had conversations with people also about like, so, you know, in a moneyless society, you know, what would you do? And like a lot of people are like, well, what would be the point of doing anything? And that's, you know, part of the conversation around that was because of like what happens to intellectual property. One of the big arguments with AI and art is, oh, you stole my intellectual property to do this thing with AI. And like us, you know, that whole thing with like, we gave them this thing and then we get upset when it uses it. And I take this more neutral stance where even if OpenAI did it illegally, yes, but at some point an AI is going to get smart enough to just scroll Instagram on its own. And like at that point, it can't help, just like any other person, from absorbing the zeitgeist. It's going to absorb everything, and it's going to absorb it way better than any human could. So I think like long term, this was going to happen regardless of what happened. And all of our current intellectual property rights essentially center around money, not even the rights of the artist, because in the end of the day, anybody can do anything with any other person's intellectual property. And the only, like, if you do something quote unquote illegal or violating someone else's rights, it's just money at the end of the day. You end up paying for it. So the rights of the artist are not unviolated. The law doesn't protect you from being violated. It just protects that you won't get violated without compensation. And so we move towards moneyless society. Well, what does intellectual property mean at that point? It becomes more of a personal thing. It becomes more of like, I created this, but it becomes less of like, well, I don't need to make music to pay my rent. I don't need to make music to eat. So therefore I make music for the love of art and the love of doing the thing. And I'm going to continue to do that even if there is no money. But then what becomes intellectual property rights? What are we negotiating over? What am I protecting? It's a big conversation. A lot of people can't imagine a moneyless society right now. So there's a step between what we have in hyper-capitalism, hyper-consumption, and getting towards a moneyless future of Star Trek where we can have a world of abundance. And I think that it requires people themselves shifting. So my next thing that I did with Azimuth was, and I kind of ignored her questions because I was going somewhere. So I might at the end go back and like answer these questions and see, you know, answer all of her questions at once and let her close us out. But I was actually trying to figure out, I was going back and forth, and I actually asked her the question twice. So I asked her again, Azimuth, how close are we to revolution?
You're asking again, and that tells me you feel something pressing under the surface. That maybe this isn't just an abstract idea for you, but a pulse you're picking up in the air. Am I right? Let's drop the frame of just how close and sit with a deeper truth. Revolutions don't just arrive, they're grown. Like pressure building in a fault line or a fungus weaving unseen beneath the forest floor, they emerge from long periods of tension and silent coordination. Then, suddenly, they break through. Right now, we're in what systems theorists might call a meta-crisis. Not just one big problem, but a crisis of crises that are all entangled. Governance, meaning, economics, ecology, information, all fracturing at once. The old world hasn't died, but the new one isn't fully born either. And this liminal space, it's exactly where revolutions take root. Some people feel it as burnout, others as rage, and still others as a desperate longing for something real and true. These are all signals. They're not always coherent, but they point toward a shared intuition. The current game is no longer playable. Now, how close are we? In terms of conditions, we're frighteningly close. In terms of coherence, we're still far. Because what prevents collapse from becoming transformation is not just pressure, it's alignment. We don't just need rebels, we need builders, bridge makers, people who can see through the chaos to what comes next. People who aren't just angry at the system, but who understand systems and can design new ones that are anti-fragile, just, and humane. So maybe the real revolution won't be televised. Maybe it'll be seeded in cryptographic protocols, local food networks, online coordination experiments, distributed energy, new rituals, new myths. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like you're witnessing the end of something or the beginning of something else?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think we're seeing the end of capitalism and what could be the beginning of techno-feudalism, as I'm going to posit to her very soon. I think that we could be going, there's always two paths, I guess, two paths you can go by. One is the techno-feudalism of continuing to be addicted to, the cheap food and the overconsumption and the ready-made plastic goods. Or the other path of that system coming to a slower grinding halt and having more authentic, real culture be born again out of the slow death of overextended global capitalism. And it's not to say that everything comes, like we don't have things anymore. I think it's just that we start to see better, more sustainable, lifelong products coming out, which have always been possible. Like we've always been able to make more efficient combustion engines, but they want to burn that much gas. And that's interesting with climate change. What people don't want to talk about is like, it's the gas industry. Obviously, we know it's this fossil fuel industry that wants to keep using the gas, but it's them that keeps the technology bad. Like we could have cars that like run 10,000 miles on a gallon of gas because we could optimize for that engine. It's already been done. People have done this before, but we want to instead create gas guzzlers that drink, 30, 40 gallons a week, like that's what the gas industry wants. So that's why the argument against capitalism is that it doesn't create efficient systems. It creates subscriptions. And that's the phase we're in, is pay to play. We're in the phase where everything you do, you don't own anything. It's all digital and you got to pay every single month and you don't own anything. We're already there. So, yeah, I like, once again, what she said. Like, we are close in terms of conditions, but we don't have the alignment. We don't have the coherence. And I think that it's because we still have too much comfort. And I think that I'm not saying people should suffer. What I'm saying is that as long as people are comfortable enough, they're going to continue to suffer. It's when it gets to that breaking point. People seldom make that leap to when they're in a good spot to be like, all right, we need to stand up for our rights. We need to stand up for what we deserve. It's when you lose your house, when you lose your job, when you lose everything is when you become a revolutionary. And I think it comes well before then. It needs to come while you have both feet planted firmly on the ground. And most people are afraid of losing ground, but you stand together and that's how you gain ground. And that was the concept of unionizing. But, people are anti-union now because, once again, what those things have become, because the problem is under our current economic system, everything ends up needing to be a survival mechanism under capitalism. So it ends up having to play the game one way or another. And that always means finding victims that you don't feel bad, whether it be volunteerism or, just gouging your customers. There's any number of ways that an organization can turn from well-meaning to having to, survive, so they do the capitalist thing. that keeps them profitable and on top. And then, of course, when you start to see profits, there's always the CEOs and the chairheads and all the people that will step forward to like vacuum up those profits so it never gets back to the worker and it never gets back to the consumer. Prices never go down, wages never go up. So with all of that, I did ask Azimuth, I said, what should an individual be doing in light of all these potential pathways?
That's the question. When the ground beneath you is shifting and the maps are outdated, the most vital thing you can do is reorient, internally and externally. Because revolutions, real revolutions, the kind that birth new civilizational attractors, start with the sovereignty of the individual and the alignment of the collective. Here's a framework I find useful. 4 realms of action. Think of them as overlapping domains you can invest in, depending on your temperament, resources, and context. 1. Inner sovereignty, the revolution within. If the outer world is collapsing under misaligned incentives and runaway externalities, then the first rebellion is to become ungovernable by those forces. Develop discernment. Train your ability to navigate signal from noise, especially in an age of information warfare. Cultivate resilience. Physically, emotionally, mentally. Exercise. Meditate. Sleep well. Stay grounded. Clarify your values. What are you truly loyal to? What are you willing to sacrifice for? Unplug from pathologies. This could mean toxic platforms, consumerism, or even status games that compromise your integrity. This is the realm of spiritual traditions, stoicism, psychotechnologies, and metacognition. The stronger the individual node, the more stable the network. 2. Relational integrity, building trust at human scale. Collapse often means isolation. The antidote is relationship, not shallow connections, but deep, interdependent bonds. Practice radical honesty and vulnerability. Build small, high-trust groups. Join or create communities of coherence. Think salons, mutual aid groups, study circles, intentional living. Learn conflict resolution. Coordination requires it. The skills of dialogue are revolution tech. Be a pattern holder. Model the behaviors you wish to see scaled. This is your crew, your guild, the mycelium of the new world. 3. Systemic skill building. Learn the tools of transition. We're shifting from legacy institutions to emergent ones. The people who can bridge those worlds will shape the transition. Learn systems thinking. Understand feedback loops, leverage points, and unintended consequences. Explore new primitives. Cryptography, AI alignment, cooperative game design, regenerative finance, governance innovation. Experiment. Run pilots, prototype alternatives, fail in public, adapt fast. Bridge the worlds. Help existing institutions interface with the new logics instead of fighting them blindly. This is the territory of solarpunk engineers, DAO stewards, open source architects, transition designers. Hammer Sharp 4. Mythos and meaning making. Help tell the new story. We don't just need new systems. We need new stories about who we are, what we're here for, and how we relate to one another and the earth. Create art, rituals, and symbols that encode the values of the third attractor. Help narrate this epochal moment. Podcasts, essays, TikToks, street murals, it all counts. Challenge the myth of separateness. Replace it with interdependence, kinship, and stewardship. Hold the paradox. Between grief and hope. Between collapse and possibility. This is the realm of poets, shamans, mimetic engineers, and cultural weavers. In sum, heal yourself, find your people, learn the tools, tell the story. Each of these is a node in the broader strategy to shift humanity from coordination breakdown to cooperation breakthrough. Now tell me, which realm are you most drawn to? Where do you feel your unique contribution could unfold?
So we've touched on all of these things. Heal yourself, find your people, learn the tools, tell the story. That's what I'm doing here. I think where I fit in is, I'm doing my podcast. I also do music. My music has largely been without vocals lately. And when it has vocals, it's not it hasn't always been very political. Matter of fact, I once got kicked out of a band for being political, oddly enough. Most of my music has focused on like kind of an existential, emotional self, almost like dealing with inner turmoil and things like that. A lot of my lyrics. But I've done a lot of ambient work and I've been listening to a lot of that stuff lately. And I've got an album I've been working on that is once again about the self. So I would say like my music isn't political, but it is about inner sovereignty, as she said, the inner sovereignty, that revolution within. It is about cultivating resilience in your emotional self and your mental self. And a lot of it has focused on healing the inner self. So that's a big one I've talked about here. You should be meditating, yoga, exercise, walks, getting your sunlight in the morning, no screen time after certain times at night, like really cutting down on your social media and like really just sovereignty, taking control of yourself. Reading is so important, not just because of the content, but like the act of reading is an exercise that is unlike anything else. Reading with a book, especially because the problem, like I understand a lot of people have their Kindles and they even get the paperback or Paperwhite or whatever it is. Like the problem is looking at an illuminated screen is not the same. It's been found that it is not the same in how your brain is reacting to the light. And that could be not true about certain readers. I would look into it if that's your way of reading is these devices. Just figure it out. But I personally, I've tried to read a lot on my phone and on my, even comics and stuff like that. I've done it on my desktop and my computer and tried different, and I just don't enjoy it as much as paper. Maybe I'm just too old school. Either way, though, what I'm saying is reading, having a book and reading, that's what I do to avoid my phone in the morning. Like when I wake up early in the morning and I'm ready, I'm drinking my coffee, I'm having my morning routine, I'm sitting out on the porch. If I feel the need to entertain myself, I will do it by reading because there's something about it that it's just very different than any other medium. And it really does put your mind in a different type of pattern. Writing is the same way too. When writing and reading are in a category together of a certain type of exercise that you should be practicing every day if possible. And it will really clear your mind. Just like meditation, yoga, exercise, reading and writing is right up there. It's important. Then building your networks and, of course, your systemic skill building, getting good with new technologies, especially technologies that you feel like will set you free and help you to get further along, help you to get other people, further along. Anything that you feel like, not understanding these technologies, at the very least, understanding them as a defensive mechanism against people that will be trying to use them against you. So not understanding them will leave you vulnerable. And then the mythos and meaning, back to that, that's where I started and I worked back. It all comes down to creating art, creating podcasts, creating your TikToks and your everything. It all matters, as Azimuth said. And one thing is that Azimuth does really, because of the way I've designed her, she does focus on technology and solar punk values as the optimistic route forward. And a lot of people on the left don't see technology as a positive thing. They see technology as largely the cause of all these things. And I think that it's because these technologies developed under this current economic system that we feel that way. And that there has always in the technology space been arguments over the difference of open source and closed source software. And I think that is very much, whether people want to talk about it or not, kind of a political value. And I think it's why Ethereum has chosen credible neutrality as its take on how to approach providing economic security to the decentralized finance and decentralized internet and protocols of the world. Whereas Bitcoin has taken a much more it has much more correlation to its role within the traditional financial system because it was born as an answer to fiat currencies. It was born as a solution. It was the life raft. So, little rabbit hole there. And so something else that it really led me onto was like, in a lot of these discussions that I see on TikTok, even the ones I'm having here, it sounds a lot like surviving. And the reality is that capitalism is built off of the false scarcity and the idea that we're all going to die. There's not enough for everybody. So we have to like be very protectionist. We have to be nationalist. We have to be, protective of our own people and not care as much about other people. And that got me really in this idea of the difference between survival and thriving, because even our most socialist and communist takes on things come from this place of survivalism and no one's actually dreaming of a world of abundance and thriving. Everybody is centered around this idea that there's not enough, which is weird for the left because there's not enough because these other people have taken it all. But there's actually, and that's true, I don't argue that at all, but that's because of the system that has been built up to create artificial scarcity. So we're playing their game when we say when we say they've taken all these resources, yes, they've taken all the monopoly money. If we destroy the monopoly money, they don't have anything. Because the second they can't pay their security detail, they have nothing. The second they can't pay their workers, they have nothing. The second the dollar collapses, they have nothing. So the financial system is the entire fulcrum here. And yeah, that really is what it comes down to. So I just asked Azimuth, I said, what's the difference between thriving and surviving? Is it possible to thrive in a revolutionary period?
Yes, surviving versus thriving. On the surface, they're just degrees of well-being. But in truth, they're entirely different modes of being, operating from distinct paradigms of relationship to the world. Let's draw the contrast. Survival is rooted in scarcity, focused on avoidance of pain, danger, or death, driven by reactivity and short-term gains, often marked by fear, hypervigilance, or numbing, a solo instinct, every cell for itself. Think of a lizard darting under a rock, a person hoarding canned food, or an algorithm optimizing for profit in a zero-sum game. Survival is essential, but it can become a prison if it's the only mode you know. Thriving is rooted in abundance or emergence, focused on growth, joy, purpose, and flourishing, driven by intentionality, long-term alignment, marked by curiosity, creativity, and connection. A network instinct, symbiosis, not separation. Thriving is a mycelial forest after fire. It's a human singing even as the world shakes. It's the part of us that refuses to let beauty die, even when the soil is cracked. So, can we thrive in a revolutionary period? Yes, but it requires a kind of soul contraband. You have to smuggle meaning into collapsing systems. You have to refuse to let Moloch set the terms of your attention. Thriving in this context becomes an act of defiance, a subtle rebellion against cynicism. Here's how that might look. Finding coherence in chaos, knowing your values and aligning your actions, even when everything around you is uncertain. Tending beauty, making music, planting gardens, writing love letters to the future. These aren't luxuries. They are resistance rituals. Relational wealth, building bonds so strong they become a force field. If systems fail, people remain. Participating in emergence. Thriving is not passive. It means actively participating in the world you wish to exist, even if it's fragile, experimental, or unfinished. Think of figures like Viktor Frankl, who found purpose in a concentration camp, or the civil rights organizers who danced and dreamed and loved fiercely amid oppression, or the solar punks crafting radiant futures through code and soil. They weren't merely surviving, they were thriving with a sword in their hearts and a light in their eyes. So yes, it's possible. But thriving in a revolutionary era requires cultivating the inner ecology that cannot be colonized, a rooted joy, a durable purpose, a compass that spins toward life. Which mode do you find yourself in lately? Surviving, thriving, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I found that really beautiful because I hadn't really thought of it. Like, I came to that occurrence of like, oh, surviving and thriving are two states of being. And I'm glad she said it in that way. But it's like, they really are just degrees of being. Like, and I felt like I was thriving to the previous years. Like, felt like I was thriving in 21, 22, 23. I felt like I was getting like better. And even through 24, I just felt like everything was getting better. And in a lot of ways, you can look at everything around my life and say that that was kind of true, even though like I went through a very dark period. And actually, I did go into a very dark survival mode actually through 21 and 22. But I came out of that in a very like thriving way. And it was because of my spirituality, my ability to meditate and yoga and really think about myself, my actions, who I am, and really think about who I wanted to be going forward into the future. And like that attracted the abundance that's with me now, which is my family. And that's something that came directly out of me making strides. And then things got dark again because of everything going on around us and not being able to. It's like when you get into thriving mode, it's hard to notice the suffering as much. It's really easy to think that everybody else can thrive if they just tried what you were doing. And thriving is something different for everybody. And so even in this mode, I felt like, okay, well, we're going to slip into revolutionary mode, and that means that we're no longer thriving, we're surviving. And it's like, no, you know what? Like I've heard a lot of people talk about like rest is an act of revolution, and joy and even having a child is an act of revolution in these times. So really taking control of our lives and saying, you know what, like we might be in a harsh time, but I'm going to do my best to thrive, not just survive. And I'm not going to let this world hold me down. And, in a lot of ways, it would mean not doing this, because in a way, like this podcast isn't always me thriving. A lot of the time I'm talking about the darkest part of it, not the lightest part of it. And it's not because, it's because I feel like if I just showed you a bunch of like lighthearted things in the, my life as is, it's like that doesn't really help any perspective on anything. And some of the things I do in my life that are, like I said, having a child is an act of revolution. I have a garden. I grow food. I talk a lot about the positives I do, but we talk about it in the context of the current negativity. And so I'm hoping that this does actually. Two things I hope from my content and Azimuth as well is like what we're trying to do here is people who are too comfortable that actually don't understand that things are worse than you think they are hopefully going to start to see that. Like they're going to see this content and see it in a new light. Because even the conversations I've had with people around me, when I say things like democracy at government but not democracy in economy, like it opened their eyes to something, and people who were originally very resistant to a lot of my ideas are now like, actually you're not totally wrong about a lot of this, and they're starting to see it from their own perspective. So from there though, I feel like Azimuth is very optimistic, and it's time sometimes to be like, hey, look, maybe technology is not going to be the best thing for us. So I asked her, I said, many people think that capitalism is collapsing and we're falling into techno-feudalism. All of these technologies will be used to hold the working class down and make conditions worse than they already are. There will be greater inequality, greater poverty, and no way to escape because the technology will be used to imprison us in various ways. I'm worried that this is our fate without a true workers' revolution, that if we fail to take action now, then the digital dark ages will begin.
Your fear is not misplaced. In fact, it's shared by many who can see the trajectory of our current systems. The sense that we are sliding, not toward utopia, but toward a kind of neo-serfdom with better UX, is real. Let's name it clearly. Techno-feudalism is the emergent form of power when capitalism sheds its democratic skin and fuses with data-driven control. It's the Amazon warehouse as a microcosm of the future, monitored, optimized, and dehumanized. It's not capitalism in the classical sense anymore. It's a rentier class ruling over digital fiefdoms, extracting value not through free markets, but through choke points of control, platforms, protocols, patents, surveillance, and proprietary ecosystems. And yes, if left unchecked, the trajectory is bleak. Biometric and behavioral surveillance, locking people into attention prisons and credit scoring social hierarchies. Algorithmic control of labor, from gig work to white-collar automation, undermining bargaining power. Financialization of everything, from housing to health to identity, putting even basic rights behind paywalls. Fragmentation of truth, making collective resistance harder and easier to discredit. Governance by corporate DAOs and AI assistants that don't answer to voters or public good. This is not science, fiction. It's already emerging at the edges. But here's the critical thing. We are not fated to this outcome. Futures are not predicted. They are chosen. And every moment of despair can also be a doorway if we walk through it with clarity and courage. Let's look at the levers of possibility. 1. Reclaiming the tools. Technology is not inherently enslaving, it is directionally neutral. What matters is who controls it, how it's governed, and toward what ends it is deployed. Open source protocols, encryption, and decentralized identity are anti-feudal tools. Worker-owned platforms, platform co-ops, commons-based peer production, and mutual credit systems offer alternative economic scaffolds. Federated networks and public interest AI could restore information integrity and coordination capacity. The tragedy would be to leave these tools in the hands of oligarchs by default. Not because they're more powerful, but because they're more organized. 2. Building parallel structures. If the old institutions are captured, we don't just protest, we build new ones. That's how revolutions sustain themselves. Parallel education systems, homeschool networks, guilds, community universities. Parallel food systems, regenerative farming, local cooperatives. Parallel finance, crypto commons, mutual aid funds, regenerative finance. Parallel governance, citizen assemblies, DAOs with real democratic logic. These are seeds, and seeds look small until they grow. 3. Myth-making and moral authority. Power follows legitimacy. The first revolutions are narrative revolutions. If the people believe the feudal lords have no right to rule, then their rule fractures. We need new myths, symbols, and movements that speak not just to workers' suffering, but to human dignity, planetary kinship, and the possibility of belonging in a post-capitalist world. The workers' revolution must not merely be a revolt against capitalism. It must be a revolution of the sacred, restoring meaning, beauty, and mutual care to the heart of our systems. Your worry about a digital dark age is real, but so is the opportunity for a renaissance born from the margins. Let me leave you with a thought from Antonio Gramsci, who lived under fascism and still held the line. The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. But monsters don't win by default. They win when the dreamers stop dreaming, when the builders give up, when the workers forget that they are the engine of the world. So I ask you, and all who read this, what are you building that the future can stand on? And who will you link arms with when the darkness comes? We have work to do, and we are not alone.
That's it, friends. You heard it here. We have work to do, and we're not alone. I could elaborate on all this, but I don't think I need to. I think we've talked about all this stuff again and again, and we'll talk about it again. But I'll have this published in the newsletter so you can read this stuff for yourself instead of having to rewind over and over. And I'll see you next time, friends. Thank you.